I was electrocuted in 2011 by 2400 volts coming from a buried, unprotected junction box, like 3 miles in the backcountry. I end up in the burn trauma ICU of Salt Lake City, University of Utah. I think it was like 50 days total stay, 20 surgeries over a year and a half. Like a major, major life event. My mom would have said to me at the bedside 2 weeks into this whole ordeal in my life, she'd have said, perhaps there's a dose of humility here that is going to be necessary for the work yet to come. And so I've kind of carried that with me as one of the main things that has really been a part of this journey into having a TV show, working in the celebrity space as a chef, amongst many other things.
Hi, I'm Chris Waddell. Welcome to Living It, the podcast where we join experts in the experience of being human. Be bold. Say yes to adventure. Say yes to living it. Welcome to Chris Waddell Living It, where we talk with experts in the experience of being human, those people who have taken the risk to realize their dreams and live fully. Today, we have Eduardo Garcia. He's known as the Bionic Chef, co-founder of Montana Mex, host of Big Sky Kitchen with Eduardo Garcia. And, that's just getting into a little bit. We'll get into a whole bunch of other stuff, but Eduardo, so excited to have you on the podcast.
Hey, Chris, thanks for having me. 7 years later, I think, from our first and initial connection. So I so appreciate this coming about this way. Thank you.
Which we were talking about this before we got on. I thought that it was like twice as long because I think you bring that kind of impact to a meeting. So I felt like it had been a lot longer that we'd actually sort of known each other. But, it's funny looking at your show, watching your show, the Big Sky Kitchen. You were planning on doing a TV show before you had your accident. And it's interesting how sort of the twists and turns of how life ends up working. In some ways, are you more qualified now to be the host of a television show than you were after you'd come off of being a chef on a yacht and living throughout the world and doing your foraging and so many of the different things that you do? Did it make you unique in some ways, this whole experience that you had to go through?
Yeah. Good question. I'll throw this one, I'll answer it and I'll throw it to something that my mom helped me see that I think it was early days. It was maybe week 2 of a 52-day stay at the burn trauma ICU. And my mom, devoted, awesome, couldn't ask for a better mom, loving, says to me, perhaps this whole experience, and if anyone knew, we're about to unpack a lot, but
yeah, maybe you should tell them what the experience is too. Yeah, there you go.
I realized about to drop sort of mom mention, and yet I need to kind of put some context, and I'll do it in short order, and we can dig into anything we want to here, I guess, Chris, at your direction here with your community. But I was electrocuted in 2011 by 2400 volts coming from a buried, unprotected junction box, like 3 miles in the backcountry. Everyone's gonna have lots of questions. I get it. There's a documentary called Charge. Like, there's a lot there that you can learn from, but and we'll probably get into that too. But on the heels of an electrocution like that, and getting to help in time to save your own skin, and I end up in the burn trauma ICU of Salt Lake City, University of Utah, and have a 52-day total stay that sums up to, actually, let me clarify. I think it was like 50 days total stay, 20 surgeries over a year and a half, like a major, major life event, by the skin of your chin type event. And
but you had to hike out too initially, didn't you? On your own?
I found help. I was able to get out, and that's I don't joke when I say by the hair of my chinny chin is like by so many different ways, even getting to the ICU, getting airlifted, hiking out of the woods, all the things that needed to occur while my heart was still beating occurred, like by some way, miraculously, I would say, every time I look at it. And so we fast forward though, and my mom would have said to me at the bedside 2 weeks into this whole ordeal in my life, she'd have said, perhaps there's a dose of humility here that is going to be necessary for the work yet to come. Like, mom's pretty profound. She's a writer, so that sounds curated, but that's kind of how she would speak, especially in that moment. It's intense. She's at the bedside of one of her twin boys who is like and so I've kind of carried that with me as one of the main things that has really been a part of this journey into having a TV show, working in the celebrity space as a chef, amongst many other things. So I think your question was the influence of this show and this work in my career. I think that a really great perspective from mom at an early stage helped me kind of input the humility that I'm living in my own skin my whole life. So I get electrocuted at 30. I know who I was prior. Pretty much the same guy comes out of the ICU, minus some parts and pieces, but fundamentally I'm still all there. And yet her piece of like, hey, humility is going to be a part of all this somewhere. And then to step into this life where I'm still a chef. I still work in the outdoor space. I still, was working to be a storyteller in the space in film. So I really continued the path I was like going to. And yet through all of it, being very grateful every day and staying humble has been just a consistent lesson from this injury, right?
You knew you were telling the story though, didn't you? Like, because your friend Jen was like iPhone movie kind of thing, like in the hospital, like shooting off the phone, doing
Right.
initial interviews, conversations, which might have been for prosperity or whatever, but you started telling
Well,
that story. You were aware of it, weren't you? Or
so I worked as a yacht chef from 2000, from the year 2001 to 2011. I worked as a yacht chef. And in 2007, 8, 9, 10, I knew I wanted to leave the yacht space. I wanted to start a food company called Montana Mex. And my partner at the time, Jen, and I would partner on that with my family. We would also partner together on a film concept, TV show concept called Active Ingredient. And so we had been filming for a couple of years when I got electrocuted. I actually, the day that I had my hand amputated, I think it was like October 16th or something. So we just kept rolling cameras because life stops, but it doesn't. It's not over. It's just, we were nice to you. And it was Jenny Jane who said, and she very much is a director. She's a screenwriter. She's an executive producer on the documentary that ensued. But she had also been filming this TV show with me, this cooking show, Active Ingredient, that we're going to bring to the world. And so she brought cameras, and the production team out of Denver that we were working with, they sent some lights and some cameras. And so Jenny primarily filmed all of the footage from the burn trauma ICU stay. And because we were filming life anyway, and we might as well keep capturing. And B, to your point, she saw and knew that there would be tremendous value from capturing it as it occurred, just simply to recount and to go back. And if there was any cathartic motions I was going to need support in, we could go back to that painful place and look through that footage. And although I've never dug back into the archives of raw footage, I almost don't have to, because of so much of the work that I've done because of the documentary, and the conversations it's brought out has been its own absolute prescription. And so I haven't really had to go back to the raw stuff. I've been able to sort of live in the present with folks who are witnessing my story with me through the doc and other things.
did the story change? So the story where you're talking Active Ingredients was the show before, and I'm assuming this is the foraging, the going out and finding some of your food and creating with regard to the outdoors, which has been a huge part of your life, like coming from Mexico to Montana, right? Like, so that's that's part of who you were. But then there's been this shift. Does that voice, does that story change from the outdoors guy to now the outdoors guy who's missing an arm, and to, you know, to
Mm,
look at you and say, okay, well, you're missing an arm, totally undersells
yeah.
what happened with the electrocution. Because I mean, you went just with, I mean, there was so much that happened to you. What does that story change? Are you a different person then, or are you telling a different story, or are you the same guy who just happens to be unique in a little bit different way?
I love this question for so many reasons. Uh, I mean, I'd like to think we're all unique. So yes to that one. That's an easy yes. Um, Such an insightful question. Many have asked generally that question, but not the way you did, which is really bringing me to think and reflect that we did. We came out. When I say we, Jen and I, initially, and then the team at large that was really surrounding. I mean, I was represented by an agent at WME. We had a production company working with us, did some pictures out of Denver, and and even Phil Baraboo, a longtime friend, collaborator, the now director of Charged. Um, he had worked with me on the original series, and he had DP'd and filmed and edited the first sizzle that we sent to the networks and got everyone's interest. And so kind of there was these supporting players and others who were really invested in me and my recovery and my story, and they were really supportive of a film being made and a film coming out. You know,
Mhm.
it was hard enough to sort of gear up to the idea from 2007, 2010, the idea of a TV show. I'm still yachting. I'm kind of going back. I'm adding context to my way I am and the way I think, but it took years for me to be comfortable even with the idea of a TV show. And it was, I figured it would bring, if I could just inspire others to cook, that would be sort of my, I was willing to invest my discomfort of being like publicized and on camera and like out on stage, because I love the greater good of other people cooking and people getting fired up about cooking. So I had my peace made with that. And when I commit, I commit. I'm in. I drop in. You know, it's I dropped in on that one. And then with the documentary, and the idea of doing a show again, missing an arm and having, like to your point, was it going to be the same show? Was I the same guy? And we didn't know. We didn't know, man. Like 2013, couple, my hair's growing back. I'm not in bandages anymore. We had a couple more meetings back in New York and with networks, and tried pitching in 2013. And honestly, we were pitching on the idea of what I really wanted to do, but nobody in the room knew if I could still. I didn't, I mean, I'd like to thought things that I knew, but honestly, it was kind of just a lot of gentle posturing in a really harmless and supportive way. I think of like, oh, this guy like he really could do it. Probably still, we don't know. And ultimately, it didn't occur then. To your question, it just, this is a 10-year question and response. This is like an echo, and it takes 10 years to holler back, because we pulled back from pitching, and I didn't actively pitch that show. I did a couple of things here and there. I did the Hungry Life series with Jenny Jane and Yeti Pictures in 2006. And that's a 5-part series that was a very, very close representation, a short film, 8 minutes, of what we were hoping to do. And I got electrocuted, this food outdoor journey, experiential show. And so I think I'm still within the point of our context of your question, and how have I changed, or how has the concept changed, or Big Sky Kitchen with Magnolia Network today. Again, that, believe it or not, one of the producers at Citizen from 11, 12 years ago, Ann Fox and Dan Fox, they left Citizen, the company I was originally working with, to pitch a show. They left to start a new company, and they called me in 2019 to say, hey, we're working with the Magnolia Network, and Chip and Joanna Gaines brought your name up. We told them we knew you. They asked if we could reach out to see if you were interested in filming a show, a cooking show. And so I had paused. I hadn't pitched for 4.5 years. And honestly, Chris, I didn't want to. I wanted to be at home with my family. I wanted to be on the farm. I had other focuses. And yet I had to really question I had to talk to my wife, Becca, and consult with her and say, hey, is this something we want? Because if we commit, if we say yes, we better build the pyramids here. We're not stopping until we put the last stone on top. And I always, my mom and brother kind of coined this back in high school, but right reason, right motive, right cause. And we did sort of the checkout. And so, I called back. And so the show today, it is not the show that we did with Hungry Life with Yeti. It is not the original concept from when I was a bilateral, two-handed dude. It's a show for today, about me today. And so it's almost richer in the sense that it has the last 10 years baked into it, and just that I'm a different storyteller and I have a different story to tell right now. And my passion for food and connecting with others has not changed from 10 years past. It's, if only thing, just been strengthened by the last 10 years. So maybe in a way it's a richer show.
I think it probably is a richer show, because when you look at those shows, you look at, one, there's the personality. And it seems like your personality hasn't changed from before until now. I mean, you're still, I'm sure that there are slight variations, but you're a welcoming person. You're a generous chef in a lot of ways, like wanting to share the sense of what food means. But it's also it's kind of what makes you unique, and being a forager and being out and going able to get your ingredients from your surroundings makes it, seasonal, which is really cool. It makes it local. It makes it, different in that you're using, I mean, even just in your show where you're using thistle for your pesto, like that's cool and unique and part of who you are. But then there's the other part of, was being able to do the show, was that a part of your recovery? I know that getting back to like cooking was a part of being whole, but being able to share that story on a wider scale, was that anything that factored into your mind?
I can tell you that it has had that. I've been very emotional. The hand in the air. It's been, but it really, it occurred post most of the work to create the show. Honestly, I'm not great for promotion. I love a good party, but I'm it almost is more of that flash mob mentality of anytime's a good time, and the planning of it is like, oh, I don't want to deal with planning. So we didn't have a big blowout premiere party here. And yet I ended up watching it with my mom and a couple of her gal friends that are in their 70s and 80s. And these are ladies who have known me since I was in preschool. And gosh, just the emotions for all of us. It was such a touching way to watch episode 1 the day it premiered. And I would think that, like, yeah, it's been incredibly therapeutic to just, how often do we pat ourselves on the back? How often do we let go of all the what have, should have, could have, would have, and all the shoots, darns, and dang it, like how often do we do that? And just say good job, like proud of you, man. And I'm so consumed and try and when I'm in my best self, I'm really driven to make sure everyone's taken care of. That anywhere I can affect. If you're within arm's reach, look out, because I'm going to try and make sure you get what you need. And in this case, I definitely took some time to just say, like, good job, Eduardo. This was hard, man. Like, you could have said no to this anytime in the last 12 years. You could have just maybe made it simpler on yourself. And so now I feel some catharsis. Like, I feel some of that release. I feel some of that a beginning of a little bit of flow starting to occur, where when you're just fighting to put the machine together and it's not working, or you can just let it rot in the field and just and yet I've always been one to try and fix and repair and bring something back to life than buy something off the shelf.
It makes sense. And looking at it from the outside as an audience member, it looks so personal. Because you're sharing probably one of your most intimate things, right? Your love of cooking, your love of food, your love of entertaining. But then it's also filmed in your house.
Yeah, with my most like precious people involved.
With with your closest friends, with your family.
Yeah.
But it's even so I look at that, because it's almost like in some ways you're finding your voice as you're moving along, right? With like pitching this show and having an idea, and this is what we want to do. And to me, you'd always be the draw, like your personality, your connection, but it's getting more and more. And even like going to the herb cellar, going to the garden, where it's all at like arm's length kind of thing. It's all within reach to be able to. Was that a part of a concept of the story? But also, I felt myself wanting to be more self-sufficient that way, like coming out of COVID,
Mm.
to where I wasn't necessarily reliant on everything that was around me, to be able to have herbs that are in the house as opposed to going to, and then they're yours. So it's like yours, and you're self-sufficient, and you're sort of off the grid, but you're bringing all your friends there.
Someone asked me, I'm trying my best. So anyone listening, please say hi to me at Chef Eduardo Garcia on Instagram. This is really the only social thing I keep up with. But the admittance is I don't do a great job of keeping up with the messages. And I'm really trying because that's the only way this all comes to life, is when we get to connect with others on it. I think with this show, when others watch it, I hope that there's no script. It's the network has been so generous, and Chip and Joanna Gaines have been so supportive. And then of course there's an absolute cadre of support within that structure of the editors, everyone here making the film, to the team at Magnolia helping it become a show with all the blocks, everything that has to happen to make it show up on an app or on a streaming service or on cable. And it's tremendous, right? It's tremendous. And so most of what I feel right now is just that in the moment, we showed up to deliver our most honest representation of what it feels like to cook and be in that place at that time, in that moment. Every day as a crew, 18 people on set, we'd look around at each other, and I did my best to not every scene, but like at the beginning of every pickup, every shoot. And I did this on the yachts when I was a yacht chef. I would say it's showtime, and we'd go around and do like your classical fist pump or whatever, and and then almost like a cheersing, like what they say, 7 years of bad love or something if you don't look in the eye. But it was my way of intentionally just saying, hey, we're on this team together, and in this moment we are here for a purpose, and the purpose is right in front of us, and we are a passionate group of individuals that can accomplish this task, no matter how many batteries die and how many times Eduardo sniffles or forgets his line, or wait, there is no line, it's scripted, but you know what I mean? It's like, we will do this. And what happens, so it's almost like a bit of a quick permission to pause, permission to breathe, and it introduces this total level of humanity, I think, to what is really odd, actually, which is to have cameras pointed at you and to be on spot. And especially for friends and family that don't tape, that don't film, that don't work with cameras. And so we did our best to just keep it as real as possible, make sure that our lunches and meals were healthy, that we had breaks and people took time. Filming is usually up very early and up very late. And then when we actually filmed, we really tried to bring the lens and bring the microphone where the excitement was. And so in a non-traditional way, if you join us for this show, you will, in a way, be able to see the space that I call our kitchen and our home and our place. But it's the only way I know how, is to try and also share and show as many textures, smells, and sounds through vision and ear auditory alone. I want to bring you in this space. It's impossible to bring the millions of people that will watch a show to my space. But that's the value for me, is if I could just simply hug the world, right? And so this is sort of my culinary love letter manifesto out, saying if I could cook with and for you as that private chef with like yachting in mind, if I could just pull out all the stops and celebrate this dish or this time of year or this culinary story because it's holidays, we're making tamales. It isn't cooking anymore. It's not work anymore. Like, even how many times would we laugh that a DP would be in his lens, and he'd just be glued to the scene and forget that his card was flashing, like dying, because we're just cooking together. And if you've ever been around a campfire and you've been held in story, I think that's when we knew it was going to be a terrific show. It's when we found production to just be like so enjoyable, right?
Just fun, totally fun. So did the house come first, or did the show come first and the house was built to the show, or
The space.
yeah, the space? Yeah, because it looks like it's
And
perfectly set up.
the space was designed after my injury, and it was the old back porch to the house. And I joke that in the kitchen that was here was kind of in like a one-way alley of a wall, so it's like just pushed against the wall. And I just found myself cooking like I had on a boat for so many years, just looking through a porthole outside and cooking against the wall, doing dishes forever, doing dishes against the wall. And and I just thought, no way, man. What did Jenny's dad, Graham Cummins, used to say? My debt, my decision. Because they used to build and remodel homes. And I just remember looking at that back porch and just being like, it's a great view, but I don't do a lot of sitting. That'd be a great view for dishes. And so I took the back door off and we built that kitchen that we film in where the old back deck was. And now the view is to the mountains and the river. We're grateful to have a very rural kind of surrounding. And the kitchen itself, though, yes, we designed it for Montana Mex production, not TV show production, because I was rebuilding this kitchen in 2012, and I had kind of stopped pitching. And I said, well, this is going to be where we work on our recipe videos, Montana Mex marketing, where I'll do my recipe and food development here. And then more fundamentally, though, the kitchen was designed to connect with the farm, which is the outside of the home, and the ground and the land here, and for the kitchen to become sort of the nest or catch for the harvest, for the meals that empower the people that plant the seeds for the harvest. And, so the kitchen had a job to do, and its job is the heartbeat of this place. And so in that sense, it really serves as our hub, and it's such a fitting place for the show to land.
So what you're saying is this is from the cabin that we saw in Charged.
So the cabin in Charged was my first home.
Okay.
And that's on my childhood home in Emigrant, Montana. I live in Bozeman, Montana, and in this home here, we took the old back deck and made it our now home kitchen / studio / recipe development. I call it our food lab, our dojo. This is where we get down to business when it comes to food development for Montana Max Company, any of our recipes, all of our marketing. And then the show, it was a likely home, and the network said, would you invite everyone into can we just film this in your kitchen? Active Ingredient, the original concept from 12 years ago, was traveling. It would be me bringing my love of food to your house, Chris, into your community. In this sense, this is our stab at saying, hey, we want to invite everybody to come play with food with me in my place and come feel this place. And I hope, especially post-COVID, I hope that there's a sticky audience out there that will connect to the inspirations, right? From the original 12-year premise of Leave Yachting to just try and get my love of food out to more people. So we have come full circle with this show, and that it is directly like I said, culinary love letter manifesto of this is why I love food, and I hope it inspires you in some way to have a relationship with food.
How much of that ends up getting to be the evolution of who you are? Because having watched Charged, having watched some of the TV shows as well, but Charged probably more so, seeing that evolution of who you were as an individual, right? That sort of the family dynamic of like your father going back to Mexico when you were what, 3 months old, being a bit of a troublemaker in school. Yeah. What, only kicked out of 9 schools? Is that what it was?
That's all there was available.
Exactly. But then to being traveling around the world, in some ways it's funny, and I might be asking a bigger question than you want to answer, but in watching all of this, I'm looking at the evolution of who you are as an individual, and sort of being the individual who's traveling around, who's trying to do it, who's trying to find your voice, who's searching for adventure, but then also being the flip side of being the individual who is that responsible individual that everybody can count on, where you say that anybody within arm's length you're going to take care of now. Is the show in some ways like a manifestation of the evolution of who you are as an individual, going through this whole journey and finding that voice and defining that voice in some ways?
Without question, I think your observation is correct. I think this is sort of the truest representation of, if you give me the mic, this is what I'll say, that there's been. Like, and that's the great respect, and I think the great gift in all of this is, I don't know if 12 years ago, no, I know that at 12 years ago, I did not have the same understanding as to what this could be and how powerful the show could powerful, such a, there's got to be a better word, but how just sort of dynamic and important a show like this could really be objectively for so many. I think it has a different seasoning to it today than 12 years ago, when it was really had a more acute focus. And or maybe it's just simply that through this event, that same intention from prior, which was kind of the same as now, that there's some twisted, true sense of credibility that I guess can now be attached to the cliff notes, that the guys lived through something, and in fact does have something to celebrate.
I totally think so. Do you feel like you're more honest now, like as a result of the accident? I feel like, I mean, for me, in a lot of ways, I feel like the only way to be universal is to be as honest as possible. And as honest as possible means that I'm not hiding, even when there are times that I want to hide, or that I feel like I want to hide. It's almost like sort of being pushed out of society in some ways. You're like, okay, now I have to be more honest to tell you why I should be in society. Has it had that same kind of effect on you, where you've been forced to be more honest? Because you were a young, fit guy who's traveling around the world, and you seemed like you could do whatever you wanted to do.
Yeah.
You didn't have to worry about it.
There's plenty coming down the pike for me to worry about just by life alone. Prior to the injury, I got electrocuted October 9th, 2011. And I had already made a commitment to why do the TV show, why expose yourself to this many, to just why expose yourself, right? And yet there's a certain amount of show up for yourself that builds your confidence through in life. And we all choose a different path. We all have our own sort of tributaries that take us to the ocean eventually. And for me, mine just simply, mine naturally, when we look at them, a chef, I gravitated to the restaurants where I could cook and see people, watch the wait staff, see the people go by, not the in the basement chef, yachting, very personal, very connected. So I think my life has always been one of exposure to others and stimulation from others. So there's always been this back and forth that I really appreciate and I love. And yet with Charged, that wasn't ever part of the plan, No, that wasn't ever part of the plan. When Jen and I sort of came to that crux move where you gotta fish or cut bait, like friends, agents, filmmakers had been really encouraging me, to make a film, write a book, do a documentary about my experience. And I was on the fence, and I would sit in a meeting and hem and haw, come back a week later, hem and haw. And at some point, friends were like, we're not taking any more meetings, man. Like, we love you. We believe in this. We do. Let us know when you're ready. And it was on that trip when we probably met in 2015, where after meeting you in Park City, this is great. This is full circle. I went down the hill to go get my flight at like a 6 p.m., 7 p.m. flight. And we swung by the burn unit to say hi on our way out. And I hadn't been back in the unit since I was discharged 2.5 years prior, 3 years prior. And Dr. Morris and some of the other nurses, Dr. Morris was a surgeon on call when I arrived. So he was there to save my life, sees me 3 years later, looks at my scars, checking me out. And there's some of this in the doc. It's captured because we're filming at the National Ability Center. So Phil just rolled through it. But the doctor challenged me by saying, your recovery has been exemplary. The way that you have fanned this spark that you still had when you barely were alive here, you have built that fire back up, young man. Like, he was like, you have done it. And he's like, and what are you doing about it? Where are you? He was, I felt so much turmoil and inner, maybe just pain from that singular person. Not to put any pressure on you, Dr. Morris. Love you. No, it was for everyone he couldn't save because the patient gave up, maybe couldn't see the light at the end of the tunnel. How many of those patients moving ahead may have a shot, may cross that move, may send that crux move because they would have heard someone else's story and known there's a light at the end of the tunnel, even if you can't see it. And that's what he called me to do. Hey, give back. and so on that flight home, I told Phil, I was like, I'm in. That's my reason. I'm in. And so Jenny was already in for really those reasons too. And so that's why Charge was made. It was made to help other people. It was made to show and share and put a light on the caregiver role and what an undervalued and necessary resource that is when we think about recovery and we think about high time situations for people. They need help. You can't do this alone. Can't recover from heavy trauma alone. And so going into Charge, I'm getting to your question, which was, to be open, to be vulnerable, right? So we have so many connections that everyone listening is just going to have to bear with this boys club of all these places where we've connected. But so I'm on my road after this event with the doctors, of, hey, help us out. And my final piece that pushes me into knowing why to make the film is I saw a crash reel and I witnessed how Kevin Pierce had used his injury in a documented film using historic footage to help others. and I looked at all the work he's now doing forward with his Save Your Brain, Love Your Brain campaign. And I just thought it like clicked. I thought, okay, life's not over. Like this guy was able to really use his event as an instrument for good. For the life will occur. There will be others in our footsteps. Our suffering is not unique to the world. It's unique to us by circumstance only. And so crash reel, I see it. And then I go to Telluride Mountain Film where we meet again. And at Telluride Mountain Film, I watched those films under the big screen and I saw the crowds. No one knew me there, right? And I remember having that was it. I said, yep, I recognize how this is just another form of storytelling. And I remember sitting talking about a film about the cartel, and the Q&A was, why do you think the drug lords would have been so open to you as a director and camera crew being in their space, documenting and exposing their story? And as an amputee sitting there in the room on the cusp of my own affirmation to make a film, the writing on the wall for me was that I had just witnessed Kevin. I had witnessed all these films this week, and all I saw was a tremendous power in such a positive way that when you do not hold the wall up, but you let the wall down and you expose what you are, you expose how you are, you're incredibly honest with the world, it is absolutely the most infinite, powerful resource we have, is to just be as ourselves, be as we are, and stand for who we are. And in that sense, like even to the drug dealer's point, hiding is like a very vulnerable place, because you have no idea what's happening. You're so disconnected, you don't know. Whereas when you say, I am here, come to me, that's a very, very powerfully authentic scenario.
Yeah, no, most assuredly. I mean, it's interesting how much you talked about there, where the doctor is effectively kind of giving you a bit of responsibility, right? I mean, it's like, you have made it through, you have a responsibility to tell this story to help other people, which then shifts the perspective a bit in terms of looking at like a TV show, because it can be looked at as a vanity play. Like this is you, and it's more about you, whereas you're using yourself as a catalyst to help other people and to make it a much bigger movement in a lot of ways, a much bigger impression on people. I want to look at one thing that's kind of interesting though, too, just in the sense of like, I mean, you've gone through, and it's easy to call yourself an amputee. And that's part of it. When we see the bionic chef thing, and you say you're not going to cut any fingers off or whatever, which is great. But sometimes that's the easiest thing to deal with. Like I remember for me, when I was in the hospital, I had broken my back. I mean, they sliced me. They effectively like filleted me, right? So a 14-inch scar down the middle of my back. They took some bone out of my hip to graft into the bone that had been pulverized in my spine. And I go, okay, like that's fine. I mean, eventually they're popping the staples out, and it's literally like staples, like staple gun kind of staples. But in the crash, I had some more trauma, and I had blood in my pleural cavity, so around my lungs. And the thing that bothered me was they came back and they said, okay, we need to drain this. And they numbed it up. They sliced it, put an X basically, and put this tube in to then drain off the blood around my lungs. That bothered me so much more than all of the other stuff. And I have a buddy who lost his legs in Vietnam, and he lost like the last digit or the last knuckle on his index finger. He lost both of his legs, and the last digit on his index finger is the thing that bugs him. And from the outside, you're like, well, that's not that big a deal. Did you have any of that? Because this is part of the experience that you're sharing with those people in the hospital.
Can I put a question to you, just because I'm hungry for it before? Hold on. So the X, the mark of where they're going to drain these fluids, what was it? The scar that it left? What was it that bugged you about it?
No, it was literally, I mean, it wasn't what they did is they actually sliced an X to be able to put that tube through. So then now I have an X. It was basically just going right in between my ribs, which you look at and go, okay, it's whatever, it's a half an inch or an inch or something like that. And you're like, no big deal. But that was the one I felt violated, having this tube stuck in, and I'd had tubes in and out of my body the whole time, as I'm sure you did too.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to make sure I wasn't assuming where you were going with that, and not necessarily do I have anywhere where I think that no irks like that in the physical today. I think I was fairly beat up going into it. So I mean, I joke that I won't have to worry about carpal tunnel in this hand, but I had to deal with it in this hand the last 10 years, and so like a very physical career prior to the injury, and then still to this day, I think physicality for me, as long as I can, um, is just a part of my rhythm every day, and it feeds me in so many ways when I can do it. I think there was only one moment where and it was while I was still in the unit. I would tend to really reverse the order and try, when I was conscious, to really inquire about my team and what their lives were like outside of the unit. And you spend a lot of time with your nursing team and your care team. And there was someone who I think was new to my shift that maybe was distracted, but just didn't have the same sense of care in a fairly routine procedure one morning or one day. And I flipped. I like, listen, there's a tiny bit of pain, very temporary pain caused by just the oversight of attentive care. And I was like, listen, I've mostly been cool for this whole stay. Like, and otherwise, I think that if there was any energy coming out of me in a way that was just challenged, it was my patience coming back into my own boots, driving my own truck again, being back in my home. Like, there's a testicular cancer aspect to my recovery that I often overlook, and that had its own journey of time and attention to deal with. And probably the hardest thing for me was just waking up feeling hungover every day, coming off of chemo meds. Like, if for anyone out there living with chronic pain, for anyone out there living with chronic mental health challenges, it's incredibly challenging. On our best days, we juggle a little bit of everything, but on the hard days, one or more of those compound and they own you, and you may not even know it though. You may not even know it because you live with it every day. Like, I live with pain in some way every day. And some days I'm looking at myself at 5 p.m. Why am I being such, what is going on? And then I'll be like saying that while I rub my back on a corner, I'm stretching my arm out, and then it's like, oh, like I need to do some self-care. Like, I'm in pain, and so I'm short-tempered, I'm impatient, I'm not giving everyone time. So honestly, like, it's more of that kind of stuff that is where if I get a little bound up, it's dealing with the pain I feel just overall in my body. And if it manifests in me being not my best self, that caused even further conflict, like, gosh, I don't want to be like that.
Yeah, that baseline of pain sometimes is something that you're aware of, but you're just not really aware of, just because things are harder. Every single thing becomes difficult, and when it doesn't quite work out, then it becomes that much more of a challenge. One of the things you talked about in the show was coming back to, and it might have been the movie, but coming back to being quick, like being a chef. One, you're kind of the guy setting the tone for what's happening, but then you're also responsible for moving quickly, because in a lot of ways that's almost, I mean, so many of these restaurants, it's like that's how they keep score, right? How many meals did we turn in? I mean, I don't know. I've read some Anthony Bourdain, and so that might be coming from Anthony Bourdain.
No, you read the right book. You've seen the right shows. Learning my speed, learning how to, the humility mentioned, 100%. Like, I just couldn't. I went back into the kitchen, back to Montana Mex for farmers market prep one day, first time being back in the kitchen in months. And we're a small team, but I had a bandage on my head. I had chemo face, I just was like, and I wanted to be in the kitchen. And I just recognized that I was not everyone let me fumble through it, and I'd ask just like, hey, don't mind me. I'm just trying to figure out how this all works again. So we would communicate openly, and fast forward a day, a week, a little bit of time, and then now today, I've become very open with when I need help. I'm not afraid to ask for help. I ask for a lot of help, and I recognize that I don't need to own every movement of every operation. And furthermore, the specificity that pretty much consumed my professional career as a chef. Everything has to be this way and it has to be perfect. I was able to let go of a lot of that, and I had to let go of a lot of that and just start with now. Well, what can I do well? What can I do now? And let's make that be the premise and foundational footprint for what A+ looks like today. Because trying to run by the rules of yesteryear is not going to work here. It's going to drive me.
But part of it is making it your own too, isn't it? I mean, just the idea of, because you've gone to culinary school. I mean, you started as a 15-year-old, you're picking up some family recipes along the way, but then isn't there a part of sort of the artistic part of like making food? And I thought about that, like in watching the show where you were talking about, okay, we're going to poach the chicken for 25 minutes. And you said you're going to poach the chicken. And I thought, okay, but what does that mean to him? Does he go by a timer? Does he go by smell? Does he go by intuition in terms of the timing of how things go together and sort of bringing this artistic, spectacle together?
I think if you were to think through your sports of choice, there's joy rides, which can be carefree, and then there's sort of the real focused moments of we're summiting, we're doing this, sketchy, everyone heads up, and yet baseline on all of those is Chris Waddell and everything up to that day, all of your experience up to that day. And so I think for better or for worse, I'm sort of always geared like that. I'm always accessible, and every door I usually use here is always ready to be used. I can change gears pretty quickly in that sense. Yeah, I think I've learned to let go of a lot more and just roll with what the day does, what the day brings. And like what matters most is, did I give it my best? Did I show up prepared? Was I, and a lot of that boils down to just not agreeing to do anything that doesn't line up with like what where you're supposed to be, what you want to do. I think there's a lot of magic that occurs by simply making good decisions early on. It's sort of like, if no one really taught me investments in a classic financial sense, but I remember hearing something in like a Rich Dad Poor Dad book when I was in college, or I don't know, something, and it said you make your money at the decision to purchase, not at the sale 10 years later or 15 years later. And that's kind of how I think about partnerships and work, and is if you commit to it in the beginning and you know why you're there and why you're going to do it, knock it out of the park from the very beginning. And it's easier to do that when you're showing up for something that's what you want, versus saying yes to where you shouldn't be or where your time's not going to be well valued and spent.
Making those good foundational decisions that then allow you to have that creativity.
Yeah, because it's hard. It's hard to execute on anything. Life's full of crazy challenges and pitfalls, and it's even harder when we agree to be where we shouldn't be, when we agree to work on something and it's like, I kind of just had to. I don't really want to do it, but and like I just think the world. Imagine if we just woke up in our purpose every day. And I'm not saying everyone knows what their purpose is. I'm not saying I've always known what my purpose is, but I feel like when I'm lost or I can't see straight, some of the core fundamentals, like, okay, I'm going to just slow it down. I'm going to make sure I'm well fed. I'm going to take big breaths. I'm going to drink lots of water today. I'm going to try and do some push-ups if I'm not outside. Like the fundamentals always kick in, right? And that's what we did on set with this show. It's like, okay, these days are so monstrous, like 18-hour days. We shot for 19 days straight, however many it was. And so every day we had to start with everyone's core, which is, are you fed? Do you have your water? Do you have what you need? Everybody stretch. We're about to settle in for like a good 2 hour tape right now. Ready? Okay. But it's never without that check-in, because if any of us are struggling going into it, we've really neglected sort of the big picture, which is that we do this together, and that really collectively means that we're not really without when we think that way. We just have yet to exchange resources and share where we are, vulnerabilities, right?
Yeah, no, that's for sure. And that's interesting because it is so personal, this interaction with you and your team and with you and yourself as well. How do you look at yourself? Because you said you got married 3.5 years ago, and in the movie, you really documented well your relationship with your father, where he left when you were really young, but then you had this beautiful relationship later on in life, and obviously your mother being the rock and sort of the spiritual part of so much of where she led you, but then also food has to be another, food in the outdoors. I mean, you keep tapping into so much of the spiritual, like finding this spiritual and that spiritual and what it means. Having had that relationship though with your father, how do you look at that as you're looking at being a husband? And I don't know if, I mean, you talked to testicular cancer as well, and I don't know if there's a child,
Yeah,
in the offing.
loving these questions, Chris, and thanks for asking them. Always loved kids. Was told I could not have kids, or I wasn't producing before. Hold on, sorry, let me streamline. Before going in to treat my testicular cancer with 3 months of aggressive chemotherapy, I was advised, go bank sperm. It's best to have non-radiated swimmers if you can. So free some clean guys. And when I went to do that, I was told that there were no live or active sperm. And so fast forward, and the body does miraculous things. And a friend that's in immunology, so it's like one of my closer doctor friends, he just kind of always said, don't give up on yourself. The body does crazy things. And just because it wasn't producing then on the heels of a very traumatic event doesn't mean it won't kick back in gear one day. So keep the faith. I feel like I said that about my forearm, which is amputated right here, halfway between my elbow and where my wrist would have been. And so every day when I'm moving either hand, right hand, but my left hand is moving, and that my forearm is crushing away right now. And I just figured one of these days I'm not going to let those muscles completely atrophy. Don't let go of that. But we'd like to, my wife Beck and I, we'd love to have kids for the right reasons. Feel like the world's never going to be hurting on special and good souls, and we feel that that's one thing we could really contribute in our best way. When I think of my dad, and I think of being a father and potentially, right, or being a TO, like, or even working into an elder, like, just I'm 41 years old. My mom has recently moved in with us, and I always saw it that way. She had asked specifically to be cared for within our family homes, and what an easy yes for me then and now. Now the complexity of it actually occurring is a different ball of wax. I think that becoming a parent will obviously address major patience issues and have me stretch like I've never stretched. I can't really, I don't know how, I don't give much thought to, well, how will I be a dad if I didn't have it? Like, there's not a lot of room on that runway for me. It just, I feel way more already on this marathon of just, this is what I see around me. Here's this world at my age. Here's what I've learned. And if kids occur, you're in for a wild ride, because this is what I can do. I can really try and follow the lead of so many before me, so many mentors, so many peers, so many elders. I can reflect on my nurture and my nature, and I can just simply promise the next generation, whether you're one of my pollitos, like a community, little one in my midst, that I'm an uncle to, or one of my own, you'll get the truth from me, and you'll get all of it, and in a way that I hope is helpful. So, there may be some factors of dilution given how young you are, or like I just that I hope to bring as much of life to the next generation as possible. So whether that's sleeping under the stars, or you know being your call because you're drunk under the stars at 15 and you just need someone to pick you up. Like, I want to do it all.
Yeah, I think that they recognize that sense of the truth, that sense of the open heart. Purpose, as you mentioned, I'll get you out on this one. You mentioned the idea of purpose and following your purpose and
Mm-hmm.
finding your purpose too. Do you have any sort of insight? I mean, you've had an interesting journey in that in a lot of ways you found your purpose at 15 years old, flipping burgers and fries and making pizza, these kinds of things. But I also imagine that at that time you weren't just like one of my father's buddies used to say that one kid is worth a half a man and two kids working together are worth a quarter. That they're not, they're distracting each other and then they're getting into trouble and they're not contributing
Yeah.
all this stuff. But it seemed like as a 15-year-old, you saw something more in food and in
Mm.
cooking than a job necessarily, a summer job or whatever. Did you find that purpose, and do you have any sort of insight on being open to the nature of purpose?
Yeah, absolutely. I I will have to stretch this example over 20 years, because at 15, my first job flipping burgers, throwing pizzas, Chico Hot Springs, it was for a paycheck. I had just learned how to fly fish the summer before. I could legally have a car. I was my first year of high school. Like, I needed some cash, and it was I don't didn't grow on trees in Southwest Montana at the time. Still doesn't, as far as I'm aware of. And you could pump gas. You could work at the grocery store. You work on a ranch somewhere, or you could work at Chico Hot Springs Resort. And so I got a job as a prep cook, and for me, that first check, $214, like, wow, snapped it in front of me. It's like, wow, man, all I had to do is flip burgers, wink at pretty girls, make them milkshakes, and grate cheese for nachos. Like, yes, indeed, let's do this. And so I worked all summer, and at the end of that summer, I had like $4,000 saved, or and loaned it to my brother so he could buy his car, which was our car. And it wasn't until I was 25 that I was on a yacht in Sardinia, and a crew member had suffered the loss of a family member and was in such pain and sorrow and despair. And I realized that although it felt like no one could do anything and I could do nothing, I could cook food for her that was her favorite food, and it would be comforting to her, and it would soothe her, and it would let her know that we cared, that I cared, that we cared. And so for the rest of that day, I made Shannon breakfast based on what she loved, and lunch and dinner the same. And I like to think that I witnessed her sort of float onto this side of tolerable. And when you're in that moment in life, when you lose someone you love, it's going to hurt no matter where you are, and you can't go anywhere where it doesn't hurt. But you can really try and swim to the life rafts that are around you that offer some float. And that's when food changed for me to purpose, was at 25. Prior to that, it was passion, it was excitement. I had all the energy for it. It was fun. It was invigorating. It took me around the world. And it was at 25 where I recognized, wow, there was so much more to just this than creating pretty food or good tasting food. And this is impactful stuff. Like, this has the opportunity to really construct, deconstruct, reconstruct. Food is crazy, omnipotent. Where have I been missing this? And that's when purpose sort of just slam dunk me, man.
That is really very cool because you'd already gone through you'd gone to culinary school, you were working as a chef, and then you recognized your purpose as you were already working as a chef. And sometimes it doesn't happen in the beginning, right? It's not, this is the path you go. You recognize the path as you're along it.
And that the purpose can change, will change. Passion changes too, right? So, the purpose at 18 when I left school, I had a decision to make, Chris. It's like, go to cooking school, be purposeful, or fill your car, fly rod, climbing gear, adios. And I had friends traveling to Europe, taking gap years. I can't even imagine. I'd own an olive farm in Greece. I don't know, man. I'd be, I feel like I just knew that for my type of personality, given the way that my early years had really seduced me to just chase hedonism and fun and expression and no real thought to, like, what am I here for? What am I here to lastingly do? I knew then in that moment that if I did not continue to be purposeful to something like an education or a career where my focus would really be put to work, if I just sort of continued with my senior year summer of fly fish till dark and the world's your oyster, I don't know where I would disappear, And so, so it's interesting that, like, that first purpose was just be at purpose. Okay, school, get a skill, like, keep your hands busy, Eduardo, keep your hands busy. And then all of a sudden I'm 25, yachting, traveling the world, having a great time, but it's almost a little too bucolic, right? Like, it's still like that senior year. It's like a laissez-faire, beautiful travel through the world. I'm cooking hard, but you're in your early 20s, you can stomach that kind of work. And so when that moment occurred, my purpose shifted from just doing what was attractive to me and what was fun and what was fulfilling on all accounts, to this recognition of, I can't really cook the same anymore. Like, whoa, okay. So cookbooks had a whole new, so it's not like the world changed. It's just perspective, right? Like, all the books I had on the shelf, like, I'd start thinking about those chefs a little differently. Like, that's forwarded by that one chef. Like, okay. So, purpose, I guess, shifts. And right now my purpose is most definitely doing this, not forgetting that healing is an ongoing process and not to get comfortable. Now I've done a million podcasts. I don't know, this was some of your questions were so unique to you and your experience and what you bring to this community. So I'm grateful, right, to be asked to share again and again, and for as long as it feels right.
Well, it sounds like sharing is the thing that has become your purpose, that food's the vehicle, and it's sharing that love, that sense of community, and really that sense of belonging.
There it is. Yes, indeed. Let's go with it.
That's awesome. Well, Eduardo, thank you so much for joining us. This is just absolutely awesome. It's a treat for me to get an opportunity to talk to you. Hopefully I'll meet you in the kitchen at some point. That would be fun too.
Come up. Chris, thanks for hosting and making time. For everyone that listens, thanks. Pleasure to meet you here in this space.
Exactly. And thank you to all of you for tuning in. We really appreciate it. If you've enjoyed this conversation, please like us, please follow us, please tell your friends, and we'll continue to bring you great stuff. So we'll look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. Please subscribe to Chris Waddell Living It for more stories on the adaptive community, the Paralympics, artists, athletes, entrepreneurs, experts in the experience of being human. Also follow us on Spotify, Apple, Facebook, and Instagram. I look forward to seeing you next week.